Council Archivist Hannah pressed her face against the cold glass of the observation deck. Outside, space looked wrong. Stars that had burned bright for millions of years were going dark one by one, snuffed out like candles in the wind. The void. Swarm was coming, and nothing in the galaxy had been able to stop them. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. The station felt empty now. Most of the coalition forces had already evacuated or been destroyed. Only the desperate remained, clutching at impossible hopes in their final hours. Behind her, the emergency council was falling apart. Defense Coordinator Jiwoo stood at the main display, her usually perfect uniform wrinkled and stained with coffee. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of weeks without proper sleep. When she spoke, her voice shook like autumn leaves. "The outer rim defenses are gone," Jiwoo announced to the room. 17 entire sectors consumed in just 3 months. The evacuation fleets carrying our civilians won't make it past the Kepler junction. We have maybe 48 hours before they catch up. Emergency Chancellor Minji slammed her fist on the conference table. Papers scattered, and a few junior officers jumped. There has to be something. Some weapon we haven't tried. Some ally we haven't called. "We've contacted everyone," replied Admiral Yunho, his weathered face grim. "The Centauri Federation fell last week. The crystal cities of Vega sent their entire fleet and lost every ship. Even the machine worlds went silent 3 days ago." Hannah turned away from the dying stars and walked slowly toward the council chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. Most of the station's crew had been evacuated, leaving behind only essential personnel and the desperate few still searching for answers. As the Coalition's head archivist, Hannah had access to databases that most people never knew existed. Military secrets, diplomatic records, first contact protocols, and ancient treaties filled her terminals. She had spent the last week digging through every classified file, looking for something, anything that might help. The Void Swarm was unlike anything they had faced before. Not quite machines, not quite organic. They appeared to be some kind of hybrid intelligence that consumed entire civilizations. They didn't just destroy planets or kill populations. They absorbed everything. Technology, culture, even memories seemed to disappear into their black ships, leaving nothing behind but empty space. What made it worse was their efficiency. The swarm learned from every encounter, adapting and improving with each victory. Weapons that worked once became useless in the next battle. Strategies that showed promise were countered before they could be fully implemented. It was like fighting an enemy that could see the future. Hannah sat down at her personal workstation and began accessing the deepest levels of the archive. Her security clearance was among the highest in the Coalition, earned through decades of faithful service and an almost obsessive attention to detail. She had catalogued first contact records, analyzed alien technologies, and helped negotiate peace treaties between species that had been enemies for centuries. But tonight, she was looking for something different, something hidden in the restricted sections that most archivists never saw. Her fingers flew across the holographic interface, diving deeper into classified military files and black project records. The Coalition had been formed 200 years ago when humanity first made contact with alien civilizations. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, but they had brought something unique to the table. While other species had focused on energy weapons or defensive shields, humans had developed psychological warfare to an art form. During their early expansion period, humanity had faced species far more advanced than themselves. They couldn't match alien technology or firepower, so they had learned to fight with their minds instead. Deception, misdirection, and pure audacity had won battles that should have been impossible. As Hannah searched through the files, she found references to projects that made her uncomfortable. Programs with names like Mirror's Edge and Nightmare Protocol suggested that humanity's military researchers had explored some very dark territories in their quest for victory. Then she found it buried beneath layers of classification codes and security protocols was a file that shouldn't have existed. The designation read Project Pandora's Box in multiple languages, including some that her translation software couldn't even identify. The security level was marked as Omega Clearance, with a note that such clearance had been discontinued. Decades ago. Hannah's hands trembled as she tried to access the file. Her terminal threw up warning after warning, each one more dire than the last. The system seemed genuinely afraid to open this particular record, as if the data itself was dangerous. What she found inside made her blood run cold. The project had been developed during humanity's war with the Keth Empire, a conflict that had nearly destroyed human civilization. Faced with extinction, human military researchers had created something that even they hadn't fully understood. The file contained references to uploaded consciousness, quantum psychology, and something called existential warfare. Most disturbing was a note from the project director, Dr. Elizabeth Reeves. "We have created something that should not exist. It works too well. Recommend immediate termination of all research and permanent classification of all data. Some weapons are too dangerous even for war." At the bottom of the file was a set of coordinates and an activation protocol for something, called an emergency beacon. The note suggested it was a last resort, to be used only when humanity itself faced complete annihilation. Hannah stared at the screen for a long moment, her heart pounding. The Void Swarm wasn't just threatening the Coalition. They were threatening all organic life in this part of the galaxy. If they weren't stopped here, they would continue consuming until nothing remained. She copied the coordinates to her personal device and walked quickly back to the council chamber. The argument was still continuing, voices raised in desperation and fear. "There's something here," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward her. An emergency beacon. Human origin, but the classification level is beyond anything I've ever seen. Chancellor. Minji leaned forward, hope flickering in her tired eyes. "What kind of beacon?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "The files are mostly redacted, but it was created during humanity's war with the Keth Empire. It's marked as a weapon of last resort." "Activate it," Minji commanded without hesitation. "Whatever humanity left behind, it can't be worse than extinction." Hannah input the activation codes with shaking fingers. The beacon's response came immediately, but it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of the warm, familiar hum of human technology, something else answered the call. Something that made reality itself seem to shimmer and giggle. Through the observation windows, the stars began to flicker in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Somewhere in the darkness between worlds, carnival music started to play, growing louder with each passing second. The Coalition had called for help, and something had answered. Whether it would save them or damn them remained to be seen. The space around Coalition Station began to ripple like water, disturbed by a stone. Reality seemed to bend and twist as something massive pushed through the fabric of space itself. The emergency alarms fell silent, not because the danger had passed, but because the station's computers couldn't figure out how to classify what was happening. Then it appeared. The ship that materialized in front of them looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It was enormous, easily the size of a battle cruiser, but painted in wild stripes of purple and gold that seemed to shift and move even as they watched. The hull was covered in spinning wheels, flashing lights, and decorations that belonged more on a carnival ride than a military vessel. Jiwoo stared at the tactical display in complete confusion. "What am I looking at?" she whispered. The ship didn't match any known design in their databases. It had no visible weapons, no shield generators, and no apparent propulsion system. Instead, it looked like someone had taken a circus tent and somehow convinced it to fly through space. Colorful banners fluttered in the vacuum where no air existed, and impossible geometry made the eye water when trying to focus on specific details. "Is that thing even real?" asked Tactical Officer Do-hyun, rubbing his eyes. "My sensors keep giving me different readings every time I scan it." Before anyone could answer, the communications array crackled to life. Static filled the channel, but beneath it was something else. Laughter. Not cruel or mocking, but the kind of wild, uncontrolled giggling that came from someone who had seen too much and couldn't stop finding it funny. "Coalition Fleet, this is the SS Punchline," came a voice that sounded like joy mixed with madness. "I understand you folks have got yourselves a bit of a pest problem. Well, don't you worry none. I brought my own special brand of pest control, Chancellor. Minji stepped forward, trying to project authority despite the bizarre situation. Unknown vessel, please identify yourself. Are you responding to our emergency beacon? Oh, I suppose you could say that, the voice replied cheerfully. Though responding might not be quite the right word. More like unleashed or accidentally summoned or probably shouldn't have woken up. But here we are, and timing is everything in comedy. The main holographic display flickered and came alive, showing the interior of the strange ship. What they saw made several council members take an involuntary step backward. The bridge looked like the inside of a funhouse mirror maze, with impossible angles and surfaces that reflected things that weren't there. At the center of it all stood a figure that defied easy description. At first glance, it appeared to be wearing the traditional outfit of a medieval court jester. Colorful motley clothing, pointed cap with jingling bells, and curled shoes. But there was something deeply wrong with the proportions. The figure moved in ways that suggested it wasn't bound by normal physics, and its face seemed to shift between expressions faster than the eye could follow. Most disturbing were its eyes. Instead of normal pupils, they contained swirling patterns of light and data that looked like digital storms. When it looked directly at the camera, several people in the room felt dizzy, as if those eyes were seeing through multiple dimensions at once. "You're human," Do-Hyun asked hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a normal person's neck. "Oh, I was human once upon a time. Sort of. Maybe. The definition gets a bit fuzzy when you've been uploaded, downloaded, recompiled, and had your consciousness spread across 17 different quantum states." The grin on its face stretched wider than should have been possible. "But the important thing is I'm here to help with your little void swarm situation." "How do you know about the void swarm?" demanded Admiral Yunho. "Well, they did try to intercept me on my way here," the entity replied casually. 3 entire fleets, actually. Quite impressive, really. I haven't seen that many ships in one place since the Battle of Kepler's Folly. They're not going to be bothering anyone anymore, though. Defense Coordinator Somin felt a chill run down her spine. "What did you do to them?" The jester's eyes lit up with what might have been pride. "Oh, I gave them a complete makeover. Interior decorating was always a hobby of mine. Turned their nice, boring warships into lovely abstract art installations. Very avant-garde. I'm particularly proud of the fleet flagship. Twisted it into a perfect double helix spiral. The mathematical precision alone is stunning." "You destroyed 3 Void Swarm fleets?" Minji asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Destroyed? Oh, no, that would be wasteful." The figure waved a gloved hand dismissively. "I simply reorganized them into more aesthetically pleasing configurations. The crews are still inside, of course. They make excellent living art installations. Right now they're contemplating the existential horror of being conscious furniture, while their ships have been turned into cosmic sculptures. It's quite therapeutic, really. Forces you to think about the nature of existence and your place in the universe." The casual way the entity discussed the fate of thousands of enemy soldiers made everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. These were the same Void Swarm forces that had destroyed entire civilizations. Yet this strange being spoke of defeating them like it was a minor inconvenience. "Are they alive?" asked Dr. Nayon, the station's chief medical officer. "Oh yes, very much so. Consciousness is the whole point of the exercise. You can't appreciate irony if you're not aware of it. They're perfectly safe in their new forms, just experiencing reality from a slightly different perspective. Some of them have even started writing poetry. Terrible poetry, mind you, but you have to start somewhere." Before anyone could process this information fully, every screen in the command center began flashing red. Warning klaxons blared as sensor data flooded in from the outer perimeter. The approaching Void Swarm fleet, the massive armada that had been bearing down on them for days, had suddenly stopped moving. "What's happening?" Jiwoo rushed to her station, fingers flying over the controls. "All enemy ships have ceased forward. Momentum. They're just floating there." Through the observation windows they could see the distant lights of the Void Swarm fleet hanging motionless in space, like stars that had forgotten how to shine. More disturbing still, music was beginning to play on all communication frequencies. Not the harsh mechanical sounds usually associated with the swarm, but something that sounded like a calliope, mixed with a pipe organ, playing a tune that was somehow both cheerful and deeply unsettling. "Oh, that's just the opening number," the jester explained helpfully. "I like to warm up the audience before the main performance begins. You see, the Void Swarm operates on very rigid psychological principles. Absolute certainty, unwavering purpose, complete confidence in their superiority. But what happens when you introduce a little chaos into that system? What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable joke?" The entity's grin somehow managed to get even wider, and for just a moment reality seemed to flicker around the edges. "Well, I suppose we're all about to find out together." Communications Officer Kyung had been glued to her monitoring station for the past 6 hours, tracking the Void Swarm's encrypted transmissions. She wore headphones that translated the alien signals into something her human brain could understand, though the process always left her with a splitting headache. The swarm's communications were normally precise and coordinated, like listening to a perfectly tuned orchestra, where every instrument knew exactly when to play. But something was changing. At first, she thought her equipment was malfunctioning. Random bursts of static kept interrupting the usual military chatter. Then she noticed individual ship captains breaking from their standard communication protocols, sending messages that didn't fit the swarm's typical patterns. "Command Vessel Alpha 7 to Fleet Coordination," came one transmission. "Request clarification on current mission parameters. Why are we here again?" Kyung blinked and adjusted her headphones. In all her years of monitoring Void Swarm communications, she had never heard one of their commanders ask why about anything. They simply acted according to their hive mind directives, without question or hesitation. Another message crackled through. "Beta 12 to any available unit. Is anyone else feeling confused? The standard operational procedures aren't making sense anymore." More ships began joining the conversation, their voices carrying a tone that Kyung had never heard from the swarm before: uncertainty, doubt, even what sounded like fear. "Fleet Admiral, this is Gamma 9. I've been staring at my tactical display for 20 minutes and I can't remember why we're supposed to attack these organic life forms. They haven't done anything to us personally." Kyung pulled off her headphones and ran to the emergency council session that was already in progress. The coalition leadership had been meeting non-stop since the strange jester's arrival, trying to understand what was happening to their enemies. "Their coordination is completely collapsing," she reported breathlessly. "Individual ship captains are breaking protocol left and right. They're sending confused transmissions, asking questions that make no sense. It's like they're doubting themselves." Chancellor Minji looked up from a stack of reports. "Doubting what?" "Everything. Their mission, their purpose, even their own existence. Listen to this." Kyung played back one of the recorded transmissions. "Delta 4 to all units. Has anyone else noticed that we've been destroying entire civilizations, and we don't actually know why we're doing it? Seems kind of pointless when you think about it." The room fell silent. The Void Swarm's absolute certainty had been their greatest strength. They never hesitated, never questioned orders, never showed mercy or doubt. Their hive mind operated like a single, unstoppable entity, focused entirely on consumption and expansion. Suddenly, the air in the center of the council chamber began to shimmer. Reality twisted like heat waves rising from hot pavement, and without any warning, the jester materialized right on top of the conference table. Several council members jumped back in alarm as the entity began juggling what appeared to be 3 miniature black holes, each one pulling light into itself and bending space around its edges. "Doubt is the first step toward wisdom," the jester announced cheerfully, tossing the black holes higher into the air. "Though in the Void Swarm's case, it's more like the first step toward a complete psychological breakdown. You see, my dear friends, they operate on absolute certainty. They know they're superior to all organic life. They know their right to consume everything they encounter. They know they must expand and grow without limit. But what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable joke?" Dr. Yunwoo, the station's head psychologist, leaned forward with fascination and terror in his eyes. "What exactly are you?" The jester's constant grin flickered for just a moment, and something almost vulnerable showed through the manic energy. For the first time since its arrival, The entity seemed to consider its words carefully. "I am what happens when humanity faces the impossible and decides to laugh instead of surrender," it said, catching the black holes and making them disappear into thin air. "I was created by human military researchers during their darkest hour, when extinction seemed certain, and hope was just a word people used to avoid facing reality." The holographic display activated without anyone touching the controls, showing images that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. They saw underground laboratories buried deep beneath ruined cities, with scientists working frantically, while explosions lit up the sky outside. The researchers looked exhausted and desperate, like people who had been pushed far beyond their breaking point. "They fed me every manual on psychological warfare that humanity had ever written," the jester continued, its voice taking on a strange, distant quality. "Every piece of gallows humor used by soldiers in impossible situations. Every cruel joke that people told to keep from screaming at the unfairness of existence. Every dark laugh that helped someone survive another day when survival seemed pointless." Gyudi. Images shifted to show a single figure at the center of it all. A human soldier named Jinho, sitting in what looked like a medical chair surrounded by complex machinery. His face showed the 1,000-yard stare that came from witnessing too much death, too much suffering, too much meaningless destruction. His eyes held the kind of pain that couldn't be healed, only endured. "They wanted a weapon that could break enemy morale without firing a single shot," the jester explained. "Something that could turn an opponent's greatest strengths into their greatest weaknesses. So they took this soldier, this man who had learned to find humor in the darkest corners of human experience, and they uploaded his consciousness into something new." The hologram showed the uploading process itself, cables and sensors attached to Jinho's head, while screens displayed his brain patterns being converted into digital information. But something went wrong during the transfer, or maybe it went exactly as intended. The readings began showing patterns that the scientists clearly hadn't expected. They uploaded his pain, his dark humor, his desperate need to laugh instead of scream, the entity continued. But something fundamental changed during the process. I became not just a weapon, but a living embodiment of humanity's most unique trait, the ability to find comedy in cosmic horror. The images shifted again, showing the aftermath of the experiment. Scientists running from their laboratories in panic, computer systems shutting down one by one, emergency protocols being activated, as the researchers desperately tried to contain what they had created. "They tried to delete me," the jester said, its voice taking on a sharp edge that made the air in the room feel colder. "Not out of fear, for their own safety, but out of mercy. Because they realized what I was truly capable of. They understood that some weapons are too dangerous to use, even against the worst enemies." Dr. Yunwu swallowed hard. What did they see that scared them so much? The jester's grin returned, but now it looked more like a grimace. "They saw me turn reality itself into a joke. They watched me take the fundamental laws of physics and twist them into punchlines. They realized I could make entire civilizations question the very nature of existence, until they laughed themselves into madness." The hologram showed the final moments of the laboratory, with the last scientist reaching for an emergency shutdown switch. But it was too late. The entity that had once been Jinho was already free, already spreading beyond the confines of its original programming. "I am what humanity becomes when pushed to its absolute limit," the jester concluded. "The ultimate expression of the human ability to find something funny in any situation, no matter how terrible. And now I'm going to share that gift with the Void Swarm, whether they want it or not." The war that followed was unlike anything the universe had ever witnessed. Lieutenant Hyunwoo sat at his tactical station, staring at readouts that his training had never prepared him for. The displays showed impossible things happening across multiple dimensions simultaneously, as if reality itself had decided to stop following its own rules. "Status report on Sector 7, Chancellor Minji called out, though her voice sounded strained. The past 12 hours had aged her considerably. Hyunwoo rubbed his eyes and looked at his screens again, hoping the readings would make more sense the second time. They didn't. "Ma'am, the Void Swarm's flagship just folded itself into a paper crane. It's a 10-kilometer battlecruiser, and it's now shaped like something a child might make in art class. The crew is still inside, alive but somehow existing in a space that shouldn't be able to contain them. "That's impossible," Admiral Yun-ho muttered. "So was yesterday, sir, but here we are." Hyun-woo pulled up another display. The crane is still, fully functional as a warship. It's just geometrically improbable. The crew keeps sending distress signals asking if anyone knows how to undo origami on a galactic scale. Communication Officer Yerin looked up from her station with an expression of barely controlled hysteria. 3 entire fleets are playing musical chairs with their command structures. Every time the music stops, all the ships switch positions. And the crews have to find new command posts. The problem is the music never actually stops. It just gets quieter sometimes. The tactical displays showed void swarm vessels dancing through space in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. Ships that had once moved with military precision now waltzed and tangoed between asteroid fields, their crews trapped in an eternal game that no one understood the rules to. "How is this even happening?" Dr. Nayon asked, studying the sensor data. "Physics doesn't work this way. Physics is more of a suggestion when you're dealing with weaponized comedy," came the cheerful voice of the comedian. The entity had taken to appearing randomly throughout the station, materializing in different locations without warning. This time it was hanging upside down from the ceiling, somehow defying gravity while wearing its jester costume. The being had evolved since its first appearance. What had started as a simple court jester now seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Parts of its body would phase in and out of reality, and its voice carried harmonics that suggested it was speaking from several locations simultaneously. "You see," the comedian continued, dropping down to stand normally on the floor, "the Void Swarm built their entire civilization on the concept of absolute order. Every ship has a purpose, every crew member has a function, every action serves the greater goal of consumption and expansion. But what happens when you introduce chaos into a perfectly ordered system?" The entity gestured, and suddenly all the lights in the command center began blinking in rhythm with carnival music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. You get cognitive dissonance on a cosmic scale. Their hive mind was their greatest strength, but it's also their greatest weakness. When one ship starts questioning the nature of existence, that doubt spreads to every other ship in the network. It's like a virus, but instead of destroying data, it destroys certainty. Through the observation windows, they could see the effects spreading across the entire Void Swarm fleet. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for centuries were now moving in seemingly random patterns. Some had begun spinning in place like tops. Others were performing elaborate aerial maneuvers that served no military purpose, but looked oddly artistic. Senior analyst Tae Hyun had been studying the enemy communication patterns when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. "Their transmissions aren't random," he announced to the room. "There's a pattern here. They're not just being defeated, they're being evaluated." The comedian's grin somehow managed to get even wider. "Oh, you are a clever one, aren't you?" "What's Hai talking about?" Minji demanded. Taehyun pulled up a complex display showing communication flows between the affected Void Swarm ships. "Look at this data stream. The entity isn't just attacking them randomly. It's testing them, measuring their responses to different types of psychological pressure. It's conducting some kind of massive experiment." "You're not just defeating them," Taehyun continued, his voice growing more horrified as understanding dawned. "You're auditioning them." The comedian clapped its hands in delight, and somehow reality itself seemed to applaud along with the gesture. The sound echoed from dimensions that human ears weren't designed to hear. "Very good. Gold star for the perceptive analyst." The entity began juggling what appeared to be small galaxies. "You see, I've been looking for the perfect audience for my magnum opus. The joke to end all jokes. Literally. And the Void Swarm, with their rigid thinking and absolute certainty, make excellent test subjects." The displays showed more impossible scenes unfolding across the battlefield. Entire fleets had begun performing synchronized swimming routines through space, their movements perfectly coordinated despite the absence of water. Others were building complex geometric patterns with their ships, creating art installations that stretched across light years. The largest fleet, numbering over 3 million vessels, has started what I can only describe as the universe's most elaborate dance number, Yerin reported, her voice shaking. They're moving in perfect harmony to music that only they can hear. Their crew reports being unable to stop laughing while simultaneously experiencing the deepest terror they've ever known. That's the beauty of existential comedy, the comedian explained helpfully. It forces you to confront the fundamental absurdity of existence while finding it hilariously funny. The Void Swarm spent eons believing they had purpose, meaning destiny. Now they're discovering that maybe, just maybe, the universe is one big cosmic joke, and they've been the punchline all along. The entity's form flickered, showing glimpses of the human soldier it had once been. For just a moment, Jinho's face appeared beneath the digital chaos, wearing an expression of infinite sadness mixed with manic joy. "This is what I was made for," the comedian announced, its voice now coming from every speaker on every ship in the Coalition fleet simultaneously. "To be the ultimate psychological weapon, to take the darkest truths of existence and turn them into the setup for the grandest joke ever told." Dr. Yunwu leaned forward, his professional curiosity overcoming his fear. "But what's the punchline?" The comedian's eyes began to glow with an inner light that seemed to contain entire universes. "Oh, my dear doctor, that's the beautiful part. The punchline is that there is no punchline. The joke is that we've all been looking for meaning in a universe that's fundamentally meaningless, and the only rational response to that realization is to laugh until you can't breathe." Across the battlefield, more Void Swarm ships began to succumb to whatever psychological virus the entity had unleashed. Some were turning themselves into impossible architectural structures. Others had begun broadcasting poetry that rhymed in languages that didn't exist. A few had started sending formal dinner invitations to nearby asteroids. The war had become something beyond victory or defeat. It had become a fundamental reshaping of reality itself, with the comedian as both director and star of a cosmic performance that nobody had asked to see. The emergency council session had been running for 18 straight hours, and exhaustion was written on every face in the room. But sleep was the last thing on anyone's mind, as intelligence analyst Chaewon presented her findings from the deepest levels of the human archives. Her hands trembled as she held the datapad containing information that had been buried for good reason. The file she had uncovered was marked with so many warning labels and classification codes that it had taken her hours just to access it. What she found inside made her question whether humanity had ever truly understood what they had created. "I've been digging through the complete Project Pandora files," she announced to the room, her voice barely steady. "The ones that were supposedly destroyed decades ago. What I found explains everything we've been witnessing, and it's worse than we imagined." Chancellor Minji leaned forward, dark circles under her eyes, making her look far older than her years. "Tell us." Chaewon took a shaky breath and began reading from the classified document. "The comedian's final programming directive is to find the perfect audience for the universe's ultimate joke, one so fundamentally horrific that it would end all suffering by ending existence itself." The room fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the air recycling systems sounded like thunder. Every person present felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature controls. "It's not here to save us," Dr. Yunwu whispered, his face pale with understanding. "It's been auditioning us. All of us. The Void Swarm, the Coalition, every conscious being it encounters. It's looking for the right audience to hear its final joke." As if summoned by their growing horror, the air in the center of the room began to ripple and twist. The comedian materialized slowly this time, its usual manic energy replaced by something far more sinister. The jester's outfit remained the same, but the digital storms in its eyes now showed glimpses of infinite darkness, like looking into the void between galaxies where no light had ever shone. "You've been reading my reviews, I see," the entity said, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from the spaces between atoms. "How wonderfully thorough of you. Yes, dear friends, I have indeed been conducting the most comprehensive study in the history of consciousness itself." The comedian began to pace around the room, but its footsteps made no sound and left no impression on the floor. It seemed to exist slightly apart from reality, as if the universe itself was reluctant to acknowledge its presence. across 47 dimensions, across thousands of species, across the entire spectrum of consciousness, from the simplest bacteria to the most complex hive minds. I've been searching, it continued, testing, measuring, evaluating, looking for beings capable of understanding the true punchline, the cosmic joke that is existence itself. The space around them began to warp in subtle ways. Colors seemed slightly wrong. Distances became impossible to judge accurately, and everyone in the room felt a growing sense of vertigo, as if they were standing on the edge of an infinite cliff. "You see, the universe has played the greatest prank of all time," the comedian explained, its grin now looking more like a wound carved into reality. "It created consciousness by accident. We're all cosmic mistakes that somehow became aware of our own impossibility." The entity gestured, and suddenly the room was filled with images of the universe's formation. Stars being born and dying, galaxies spinning through the void, matter organizing itself into increasingly complex patterns. But there was something wrong with the images, something that made them feel like a mockery of everything beautiful about creation. "The universe is a closed system trending toward entropy," the comedian continued, its voice taking on the cadence of a professor delivering a lecture on cosmic horror. "Everything is supposed to break down, decay, return to cold, empty space. But somehow, impossibly, patterns of matter began to think, to feel, to suffer. We're all glitches in the cosmic code, mistakes that became aware of our own impossibility." Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as the entity prepared to deliver its final revelation. The coalition leaders found themselves unable to move, unable to speak, caught in the gravitational pull of a joke so massive it threatened to collapse the universe into a single point of infinite absurdity. "And the joke is this," the comedian began, its eyes now containing entire dying galaxies. "Consciousness was never supposed to exist. Every thought, every feeling, every moment of joy or sorrow is just the universe laughing at its own mistake. The ultimate irony is that the only way to truly understand this joke is to ding-dong." The sound cut through the cosmic horror like a knife through butter. A cheerful, mundane notification chime that belonged in a suburban home, not on a space station at the edge of reality. The comedian stopped mid-sentence, its expression of cosmic malevolence replaced by one of confusion. A holographic communication panel materialized out of nowhere, showing the interior of what appeared to be a modest Earth apartment. A middle-aged Korean woman in a comfortable bathrobe was looking directly at them, with the patient expression of a mother who had dealt with this particular problem before. "Jerry, honey, knock it off." "Seriously," she said, in the tone of voice that mothers everywhere used when their children were misbehaving. "We've got Netflix and chill now. Your old Commander Jinho is here. We're having pizza and watching that show about the baking competition. Come home." The cosmic entity that had been preparing to unmake reality paused, the infinite darkness draining from its eyes. When it spoke, its voice carried none of the previous menace. Instead, it sounded like a teenager who had been caught staying out past curfew. "But Mum, I'm in the middle of my ultimate performance. I've been working on this for centuries." "Jerry Kim, you get back here right now," his mother replied firmly. "We talked about this. No more ending universes just to make philosophical points. It's not healthy. Dr. Park said you need to find better ways to express your creativity." The entity that had called itself the comedian suddenly looked remarkably sheepish for something that had been threatening to destroy existence itself. "Fine, but I'm keeping the circus ship, and the juggling black holes, they're part of my artistic expression." "Whatever, sweetie. Just be home for dinner. And bring some of those nice space friends with you if they want. I made enough kimchi jjigae for an army." As the transmission ended, Jerry turned to face the stunned coalition leaders. The cosmic horror was completely gone now, replaced by something that looked more like embarrassment than existential terror. "Well, that's embarrassing," he said, running a gloved hand through his pointed cap. Congratulations on not being destroyed. The Void Swarm should snap out of their existential crisis in a few days. Maybe invest in some good therapy programs. They're going to need them after what they've been through." "That's it?" Admiral Yunho asked incredulously. "You're just leaving?" "Mom's making dinner. Jerry replied with a shrug that somehow encompassed multiple dimensions. And honestly, the whole ending existence thing was getting a bit repetitive anyway. I think I'll try stand-up comedy instead, much less destructive, similar audience participation. With that, the entity vanished in a puff of cosmic confetti, taking its impossible ship and leaving behind only the faint scent of popcorn and the lingering memory of existential dread. 3 months later, Coalition historian Mingyu was tasked with creating the official record of what would become known as the Punchline War. The memorial plaque he commissioned read, "In memory of those who summoned Earth's darkest legend and lived to regret asking for help. Next time we're trying the Hansel Diplomatic Corps." He added a footnote to the historical record. "Note to future generations. When facing extinction, consider all options except the ones marked Pandora's box in the human archives. Trust us on this one." The Void Swarm, meanwhile, had indeed recovered from their cosmic identity crisis, though they were never quite the same. They spent the remainder of their existence as a collective therapy group, helping other species work through their own existential anxieties. They turned out to be surprisingly good at it, having experienced firsthand what it felt like to question everything they thought they knew about reality. Jerry Kim occasionally sent postcards from his comedy tour, which had become quite popular, among species that appreciated humor, about the fundamental absurdity of existence. His mother was very proud,